Now I have the pleasure of introducing our panel for you. Let's see, we'll start to my immediate left, easier this way, Adrian Frost. Adrian's practice is focused in the areas of labor and employment law. He acts as counsel and provides advice on all aspects of employment and collective bargaining relationships, including employment agreements and employee manuals, terminations and wrongful dismissals, grievance arbitration, collective bargaining, and collective agreement administration, as well as proceedings before both labor boards and human rights tribunals. Adrian Frost. Jennifer McCrae. Jennifer's practice focuses primarily on business immigration, corporate and commercial law, intellectual property, and commercial real estate. Jennifer assists businesses and their executives with a wide variety of immigration and citizenship matters, including temporary resident visas, work and study permits, permanent residency, and Canadian citizenship. To her left is Richard Leipzig. Richard is Managing Director of Acumen Corporate Development. Richard has over 30 years' experience working with a wide range of companies from mid-sized businesses to large public corporations. Most recently, Richard has carved out a niche quarterbacking mergers and acquisitions from both the seller and acquirer perspective and navigating succession planning for privately held companies. Richard has a law degree and previously was General Counsel and Senior Vice President for CanWest Global Communications Corporation, where he provided financial and business input on significant litigation, new initiatives, joint ventures, and acquisitions. And finally, Jeff Piniowski. Jeff focuses his practice in the areas of tax litigation and dispute resolution in the tax audit and appeals process, tax advisory services, as well as complex commercial litigation. Formerly a senior tax litigator with the Federal Department of Justice, acting on behalf of the Canada Revenue Agency for almost 10 years, Jeff now serves local and national clients with a wealth of experience in litigating at all levels of both the provincial and federal courts. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel. Question one, Richard is going to direct his focus to this question. Richard, could you discuss for us the financing options that are available to a foreign business operating in Canada?
Thanks, Don. Welcome, everybody, to Winnipeg. The weather will improve by the afternoon, maybe. There's a variety of opportunities for financing new businesses in Canada, and I appreciate that for some people this may be more simplistic and for others more complicated, so apologies in advance if I haven't tried to hit the middle mark. But first off, starting with bank loans in Canada, Canada has available a variety of different banks operating in Canada. There is a sophisticated regime of federally incorporated banks. There's also non-Canadian foreign bank subsidiaries operating. Example, the prior would be the RBC, the latter would be HSBC, for instance, and there are also Canadian branches of non-Canadian banks. The Canadian banking system is well regulated, and Canadian banks are well capitalized. The Canadian banking system has won international recognition and praise for its resiliency during the recent bank crisis, and bank credits continue to be readily available in Canada. There are only 6 nationally federally incorporated banks, but they have a network of deposits and branches throughout Canada. And there is a variety of competitive pricing and terms amongst almost all of them. Just anecdotally, an example of that is we act for a local 4th generation manufacturer in Winnipeg with over $30 million of sales. And its current bank has offered on a renewal of an operating credit rather unfavorable terms, including the injection of shareholder equity. And while you might think that that would be typical of the position taken by other banks, it actually our client has 4 different banking facility offers on its table to consider, all more favorable than the current bank. So there is a robust competitive nature amongst the banks in Canada, but they often tend to be cyclical in their sweet spots, if you will, in terms of which particular industries and businesses they're being attracted to from time to time. In my case, the particular customer was falling unfavorably with the perspective of its bank, but was quite eagerly taken up by other banks looking to try and capture the business. There is also, besides banks, each of the provinces, including Manitoba, has very competitive terms being offered by its credit unions. The credit unions are provincially incorporated and often can do better on rate because, unlike their federal counterparts, their equity and capital requirements are less stringent, and hence they can leverage their capital somewhat more beyond the federal banks are able to. There is also a vast network of non-bank lenders in Canada, asset-based lenders, mezzanine debt financiers, and project financiers as well. From an institutional perspective, the federal government operates 2 entities that are capable of being lenders. The Federal Business Development Bank, BDC, offers financing to small and medium-sized companies, and the Export Development Corporation is there to facilitate Canadian exporters with respect to financing their accounts receivable. If you're borrowing in Canada, I suspect much like your home jurisdiction, you can probably expect from an operating line credit that your rate will be a floating rate. And in Canada, the floating rates are typically set by your bank. While I might have mentioned earlier there was a competitiveness amongst banks, you will find in Canada that the prime rate that's published by all of the main 6 banks are typically all going to be the same. Published prime lending rate from all the banks this morning was 3%, and you can expect to incur a number of basis points above that. And that's not unlike the United States, where in the banking system keys off its borrowing from the federal discount rate. In Canada, our banks borrow their funds in effect and peg their rates based on Canada's central bank, the Bank of Canada, and hence you can expect their prime rate to be pretty well all in line. If you're looking to be in a position to take out fixed rate loans over longer term assets such as real estate or equipment, those are typically keyed off of Government of Canada bond rates, and prime is not necessarily the determining factor. You may find also that rates can be keyed off of LIBOR or banker's acceptance, but that's not normally the case unless you're doing business in jurisdictions outside of Canada while you have a domestic operation here. Won't be surprising to any of you that as a borrower you can expect to incur the typical fees, commitment fees, processing fees, and not least of which legal fees. Banks have become a little bit more stringent in terms of assessing creditworthiness, and if you are advancing funds to your branch or subsidiary, you would well expect that any of your loans that you might have been putting into your local branch, it will be required to subordinate those loans to your lender. And it would not be uncommon to expect that unless there's a very strong balance sheet, that your parent corporation will be asked to provide a guarantee, or as a minimum to issue what's often referred to as a negative pledge, which is tantamount to a covenant not to grant security over any of your assets. Canada, unlike other jurisdictions, has no currency restrictions. There's a free movement of capital, and loans can be denominated in a variety of currencies, but most typically, you can imagine they'll be based on either Canadian or US dollars. There are certain tax advantages in respect of borrowing in Canada. Canada does not have any thin capitalization rules, so hence you don't have to go through the process of determining whether or not your interest is going to be deductible because there isn't enough equity on the balance sheet. And I know anecdotally when I was at CanWest, when we were doing transactions in South America and Europe and Turkey, we would spend an incredible amount of time trying to structure our transactions, typically to manage to avoid or work within the thin capitalization rules in those particular jurisdictions. However, unlike those jurisdictions, Canada does not have a regime of consolidated tax returns, which means that if you're going to be setting up an entity in Canada and want to utilize the interest expense, you'll have some challenges and some structuring opportunities to ensure that your interest, while maybe not useful because you're starting at a negative position in Canada, if you want to move that interest expense back into your home jurisdiction, there are some opportunities but also challenges, because the easiest opportunity of consolidated tax returns is not going to be available. The other recent changes that are noteworthy is the Canadian income tax was recently amended so as to not impose withholding tax on interest paid to non-domestic lenders. So if you're coming to Canada and you have a bank that is in a position to lend funds to you while operating in Canada, you'll have the advantage that the interest paid to that entity is no longer going to be subject to a Canadian withholding tax. And that's had a fair effect in terms of the activity of foreign lenders operating in Canada. There are, of course, a number of federal and provincial programs that offer grants, not the least of which is in Manitoba. For instance, there's the Manitoba Industrial Opportunities Program. It has term loans that are available to businesses, and obviously their focus is to ensure that the use of those funds will be operated to expand in Manitoba and have a strategic advantage, including job creation and sectorial development. And then against all of that, there is a robust lending opportunities available from Canada's life insurance companies and pension companies. Canada's life insurance companies are world-renowned, and they are very competitive lenders with respect to loans that match their profile, namely long-term loans against fixed assets, and those rates have been very competitive as well. There are other facilities that I suspect you can be aware of, is that if you're buying equipment, the manufacturer of that equipment is often very happy to be in a position to offer it on terms through conditional sales or leasing. That presents opportunities for either capital or interest expense, depending upon what your perspective is from a tax opportunity. And the nice thing, of course, is you get to pay for it out of your existing cash flow over time, and oftentimes without any particular significant initial capital or downstroke. There's also factoring opportunities that allow entities to sell their accounts receivable, and then at the end of the day, the receivables are returned to the company, less an interest payment and fees. So that's a bit of the network that is available, and I've spoken by and large about lending. There is, of course, a whole opportunities from the equity side, which would be another opportunity for another day. But Canada does have a very robust private equity and venture capital network that are available to take equity positions, particularly in startups, entities operating in the medical field and the IT field. They have their own profiles with respect to the type of businesses and terms that they want, and you would be well advised to seek advice in terms of what private equity or venture capital firms would be best suited for the businesses that you're looking to try and locate. So in summary, Don, this question and answer is going to be longer than the other one, so don't feel that you're going to be subjected to the length of this answer for all the other questions. But needless to say, there is a network of opportunities, and we take a good view in terms of finding different sweet spots, and there will not certainly be one entity that will provide all of your needs, and the challenge and the opportunities is to put together a network and dovetailing each of your particular needs. But there is certainly opportunities and advantages with respect to what Canada can be in a position to offer you.
Thanks, Richard, very much. Jennifer is going to answer the next question, and it involves the need for work permits. In certain circumstances, people need work permits if they come to the province of Manitoba. So Jenna's going to answer the question of who needs a work permit and what is the definition of work according to Canadian law. Jen?
Thank you, Don. So this is one of the questions that will have a fairly short answer, but it'll set us up well for the remaining of my questions. So the first part is who needs a work permit? So it's going to be any person who is not a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada who wishes to work in Canada. And work then is defined as any kind of activity where a person is earning a wage or is earning a commission for services in Canada, or that any kind of activity that's in direct competition with other permanent residents or Canadian citizens in Canada in the Canadian labour market.
Thanks, Jen. So everybody you want to bring in who wants to work, you have to get a work permit, and she's your person. Jeff, we'll move along to you. Dealing with international trade issues, we hear a lot about the concept of transfer pricing. What is transfer pricing, and how can it affect those doing cross-border business? Jeff?
Thanks, Don. We hear a lot about transfer pricing. I'm just wondering, are folks here familiar with the concept of transfer pricing? Have you heard it in business vernacular? No? Okay, we'll start from scratch too. Transfer pricing, in the most basic sense, this is a tax topic. It's the CRA, and I'll talk more about the Canada Revenue Agency a little bit later, but the CRA is concerned about tax avoidance. And transfer pricing is essentially the notion of transferring prices from one tax jurisdiction to the next. Invariably, there's very few countries who have identical tax jurisdictions. And there's all kinds of tax planners and accountants out there and lawyers that do marvelous things in the world of trying to avoid taxes. And by the way, it's a basic principle of Canadian tax law that you can lawfully avoid your taxes. You just can't unlawfully avoid your taxes, which is why tax lawyers get paid so much money. But so if you have a low tax jurisdiction and a high tax jurisdiction, the parties want to transfer the costs to the high tax jurisdiction, and they want to transfer the profits to the low tax jurisdiction. Now, this only works if you have related entities or entities dealing at non-arm's length. So you'll have two businesses, and you'll have business A who's selling a product to business B overseas. Generally speaking, if you're not dealing at arm's length, the free market it works wonders in terms of hammering out the correct price. What gets folks into a little bit of hot water sometimes is when you're not dealing at arm's length. And that's not uncommon. You can have two related entities, you can have vertical integration. There's a whole host of ways you can be non-arm's length with another entity. You could just have a very close business relationship with another entity. And so there's an incentive to potentially work together to say, well, you know what, we're taxed really high in Canada. Why don't you sell us your widgets for that much more? And we'll work it out on the back end. So the tax authorities are concerned about essentially maintaining fair market value on cross-border transactions between entities. And that's really all, the sole question about transfer pricing really comes down to the fair market value of whatever good or service is being sold across border with related entities. Probably the largest and, well, the most significant transfer pricing case actually arose out of the Winnipeg office. I do tax litigation, so does my wife. You can imagine our thrilling conversations at dinner time. But I used to work for the Canada Revenue Agency, she still does, but she actually worked on probably the biggest transfer pricing case in the history of, I might say, the world, actually. This one, the issue was Glaxo was buying inputs for drugs, and the issue was the inputs, what was the fair market value purchased from the downstream entity, and there was about $1 billion at issue. That went, the Tax Court of Canada, and I'll get into the whole appeals process in another topic, Tax Court of Canada said, no, those weren't fair prices. You're essentially trying to work the system. Hammered them with a big tax bill. It went to the Federal Court of Appeal, and the Federal Court of Appeal said, no, it was fair. And now it's at the Supreme Court of Canada. So we'll figure out what's going to go with that. But suffice it to say, it doesn't have to be $1 billion. Transferring, anytime you're dealing with a related entity overseas, back and forth between countries, and it's not just Canada, by the way. This concept applies internationally. You'll want to be cautious about getting your pricing correct, because usually it's the best intentioned companies that think they're doing their best between two entities, pricing it out, and the CRA will come by and say, no, we think your efforts were wrong. So it doesn't have to be intentional to be offside. So that's one of the important considerations. It's a pretty hot topic, not only because of the Glaxo decision, but also because of the impact it can have on entities doing cross-border transactions.
Thanks, Jeff, very much. Adrian, addressing the issue of unionization, are all workplaces in the province of Manitoba unionized?
Thanks, Don. And as from those that are here from Manitoba or from Canada, will appreciate that that's a pretty high-level question. And the reason I was asked to answer that question is that in talking with colleagues from whether Europe, South America, or even the U.S., there are some significant differences in the concept of unionization and the rates of unionization. So this is one of the issues that was raised for me to discuss. The short answer to the question is no, they are not. In Manitoba, approximately 38% of workplaces are unionized, and in most Canadian provinces, the range is 30 to 40%. And in Manitoba, the rate of unionization will vary from industry to industry. For example, in trades, healthcare, and government sector, it tends to be higher in the 90% range. In manufacturing, it is in the 60% range, and then at the lower end of the scale is agriculture, which is in the 20% range. If a business is acquired that is unionized, there are successorship provisions that are in the Labor Relations Act that would apply. And essentially, the purchasing employer steps into the shoes of the selling employer, so acquires the rights and obligations that exist in any collective agreement, and certainly the rights and obligations that are governed by the Labor Relations Act. And in Manitoba's laws in that regard are very similar to the laws that would exist in other provinces across the country. If a business is not unionized or a new business is created, a union can only acquire the right to represent employees either by voluntary recognition, which is where the employer just says, okay, fine, we'll collective bargain with you, which is fairly uncommon, or by way of an application for certification, which is filed with the Manitoba Labour Board. And in essence, what a union has to do is file evidence of support from a certain percentage of employees that are in the workplace, and that ultimately, if the Labour Board is satisfied that the employees, a certain percentage of employees want to have the union represent them, then the union will then acquire the rights to bargain collectively, and the employer and issue what's called a collective bargaining certificate. And from that point on, the union and the employer, so the union has the right to bargain, and the employer has the obligation to bargain with the union.
Back to Jen. Jen, what does a Canadian company need to consider if it wishes to bring a temporary foreign worker into the country?
So there are various steps that need to be considered, but we're going to talk a little bit at a higher level of the main issues to think about. So the first would be, does the person require a work permit? Does this foreign national coming into Canada require a work permit? So if they are going to be working in Canada or going to be entering the Canadian labour market, they're going to require a work permit. However, there's people that are coming across for business purposes that are not necessarily work-related, such as a business visitor. That person would be someone who would not be entering the Canadian labour market. They would also not be paid by a Canadian employer. They'd be working for a foreign employer. The foreign employer's main place of business would be outside of Canada. And so, for example, someone coming across to attend, say, a board of directors meeting and they're a director, that would be considered a business visitor. Or someone coming across to negotiate, discuss, consult on an agreement that they may be entering into in the future. That, again, also would be a business visitor. And I'm assuming some of the people here today came across for this convention, and they'd also be considered a business visitor. So that's the first question to consider. The second is, which foreign worker program is going to be applicable? And really, that's going to come down to what type of job is the person going to be hired for, and what's their job description. And once you can figure that out, then the next step would be to figure out which program then they'd fall within. And there are a number of programs out there, and so it's important to make sure you're going down the right path. The third issue that a Canadian company needs to look at is whether they require a labor market opinion. And that, if they do require a labor market opinion, that is something that does need to be obtained prior to any foreign national trying to enter Canada and obtain a work permit. A labor market opinion is a positive or neutral opinion that's issued by Human Resources and Skills Development Canada that basically says to the company, you can go ahead and hire temporary foreign worker within a certain job description and title. The determination as to whether a positive or neutral labor market opinion will be issued will be based on, is there a labor shortage in Canada, excuse me, for that industry or that specific type of job? Is there some kind of benefit that hiring this person will bring to the Canadian labor market, such as creating new types of jobs or transferring of skills and knowledge to Canadian citizens or other permanent residents? There are a number of situations when a labor market opinion is not required. There's exemptions under international agreements such as NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement, which would be for the US and Mexico. The General Agreement on Trades and Services, which services a number of countries in the world. Or there's other exemptions that are just within the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and regulations. The fourth thing that a company needs to look at and consider is there any province-specific requirements that are needed to be complied with in order to bring a temporary foreign worker into Canada? In Manitoba, there is 4 specific types of jobs. So if you are, as an employer, required to obtain a labor market opinion, you have to register with the Employment Standards Branch in Manitoba. This came about in 2009 as a result of the enactment of the Workers' Recruitment and Protection Act. Basically, it's a protection for temporary foreign workers, and it protects them against illegal or improper recruitment, paying for recruitment or coming in for interviews, things of that nature. So it's to protect a temporary foreign worker. One of the things that I do recommend, and this is again just a quick overview, but is that you do obtain the proper legal advice before you actually send anyone into Canada. The process obviously is not always simple. It can be, and it's great when it is for people because it's a very quick process. But there are a lot of things that need to be thought about in which programs are most applicable. Again, we prefer that people look into these issues well in advance of sending their people into Canada because the processes can take time. If you need a labor market opinion, you're going to be waiting a lot longer before your foreign national can obtain their work permit than you would if they didn't require that. Also, depending on where the application can be made, some applications can be made right at a border when they're coming through, whereas other applications have to be made in advance. A decision has to be made, and then they get their decision and can come across the border. So there are those things to think about. Another thing that I want to raise is that when people do try and come across without making sure they have all the correct documentation in order and applications made, they become red flagged if they by the border, and that's going to affect them coming across the border on any subsequent visit to Canada. And so then you, as a foreign national or even employer, you're going to be jumping through a few more hoops, making sure your person has a lot more documentation each time they come across so that they're not going to run into those issues. Another thing to think about is that if a Canadian company is hiring and bringing in foreign workers, but they're doing it illegally and not with the proper process, they can become blacklisted by citizenship and immigration, which basically means that they're going to be put on a website shown as people who are unable to hire temporary foreign workers for a 2-year period. That can be really detrimental to a lot of businesses who rely on bringing in foreign workers for various specific jobs. So those are 2 things to think about as well.
Thanks, Jen. I know in a situation in which I was involved where the employer had spent quite a long time planning a particular program and put it all together and assembled it and made arrangements for premises and everything else for a particular employment-related program. And the person who was about to, this took place in the United States, but the systems can work more or less the same. The person who was, the team that was put on the program got to the U.S. border, and 3 out of the 5 members of the team were rejected and not allowed to enter into the United States. So that was simply because it got cleared up, but by then the program was over. So it's something that it's just good planning, good strategy to make sure that if you're going to be bringing workers into the country, that you dot the I's and cross the T's before you do, so that you're not faced with a really nasty surprise at the border. Back to Adrian. What are the approximate costs for employee benefits in Manitoba?
Thanks, Don. The number that's frequently used is at approximately 15 to 20% of payroll, but that will necessarily depend on the type of plan that an employer uses. There are certain mandatory plans that an employer must pay premiums into in Canada. 2 are the employment insurance plan, which is created by federal legislation and provides for payments to employees in periods of layoff or periods of maternity and parental leave. A second area is the Canada Pension Plan, which provides for a very minimal pension entitlement for all employees once they reach a certain age. So those are mandatory plans that are established by federal legislation, and the premiums are established by that legislation. But many employers also have their own health and welfare plans that they establish for employees. Those plans can vary considerably from industry to industry. Some of the key components for those plans are short and long-term disability plans, which provide for income protection for employees during periods of illness. But many of those types of plans are actually 100% employee paid with the premiums, so that the benefit itself, when it's paid out to employees, is not taxable. So that may be one that doesn't have an impact on the cost for an employer. Life insurance and accidental death and dismemberment, providing for a payment in the event of certain events. Pension plan, there are a variety of different types of pension plans. These are in addition to the statutory Canada Pension Plan. One is the defined benefit type of pension plan, which provides for a certain type of benefit upon retirement. The other is called a defined contribution type of pension plan, which requires an employer and in some cases an employee to make contributions to an RRSP account, and whatever that amount is at the time of retirement it is, but there's no obligation from the employer at the time of retirement. Defined benefit plans, the trend right now is for employers to negotiate their way out of those types of plans if they can, but certainly not as common. They're considered to be the Cadillac of pension plans. And then supplemental health care is a very common aspect of a benefit plan for employees. That's certainly a less costly issue here in Canada with employees covered by universal health care. So comparing that to, say, in the U.S., where health care itself can be a very significant component of a health and expensive component of a benefit plan, it's less so here. And then dental plans and vision plans are other 2 components that are somewhat less common, but still with many employers form part of the benefit plan. As you might expect, these benefit plans are sometimes dictated by the marketplace, in the sense of if your competitors in the marketplace offer a fairly comprehensive benefit plan, it's very common for the other players in the industry to match and have a very comparable package as well.
Thanks, Adrian. Jeff, there are several government tax credits available to help businesses grow and to prosper. The Scientific Research and Experimental Development credit is a popular credit used in many sectors, including manufacturing, technology, life sciences, agri-food, aerospace, and others. It commonly goes under the name SHRED. How does the SHRED tax credit program work, and how can it help businesses? Jeff?
Thanks, Don. Yeah, there's a number of tax credit programs in Canada. They're essentially designed, most of them anyways, are to incentivize behavior. They like something or want something to happen, so they'll give you some of your tax back, and that's a non-refundable credit. And most credits are non-refundable. Some are refundable. SHRED is for small Canadian companies, CCPCs, Canadian Controlled Private Corporations. SHRED is actually a refundable credit. And what that means is if you engage in the appropriate activity and you cost it out appropriately, you don't actually have to make money to get money back. And in other words, if you have a number of costs and pay no taxes whatsoever, if you're a small Canadian controlled company, in fact, you can get your money back that you put in, and a lot of budding organizations actually use the SHRED credit to finance their operations from year to year, and SHRED becomes an important part of their operations. SHRED is, as Don mentioned, scientific research and experimental development. There's essentially three components. It's basic research or applied research, which doesn't usually concern most businesses. The third arm is experimental development, which is a big winner for a lot of companies to use. Experimental development, it's unique in the sense that it can't be simply regular product development. And that's the defining line between what's experimental development and what the CRA refers to as routine product development. There's a lot of gray area in there, and it's important to document and maintain the program effectively. In terms of comparisons, our SHRED tax credit, I believe, is the most lucrative in terms of benefits of all of the Western countries. Our R&D tax credit program there have been some amendments lately, but it is still a very important program for Canadian businesses or businesses doing work in Canada. There's also a foreign component to it in the sense that if it's Canadian R&D and it's done overseas, there are circumstances where the SHRED credit can still apply. So it's a good credit. It's important for businesses. The key is, particularly if you're in the developmental sphere of a business, keeping yourself on the experimental side, trying to prove to the minister that there's a technological advancement that you're trying to gain. If you can do that, you're entitled to the credit.
Jen, back to you. Are there any specific programs in Manitoba that assist foreign workers with permanent residency?
So the answer is yes. Manitoba has actually one of the best provincial nominee programs in Canada. There's various streams in which people can apply for permanent residency. Two specific ones that I'll talk about today are ones that are really helpful for temporary foreign workers and people who wish to open up a business or invest in a business in Manitoba. One of the things also to note with the Manitoba Provincial Nominee Program is that the applications that come through that program get processed a lot quicker than any federal application. The other issue with federal applications is that they have a limit on the number of people they will allow to fall within that program. And there are a number of programs right now that they're not continuing at the moment, and so there's a limited number of federal programs that are available. The two streams I'm going to speak about is the first, the employer direct stream. Basically, it assists Manitoba employers with hiring and retaining their temporary foreign workers. It's one great program for those temporary foreign workers that fall within this, what is right now a new time cap. There's a time cap of 4 years for specific types of foreign workers. And once that 4 years has been reached, they have to go back to their home country and wait a 4-year period before they can obtain a new work permit in Canada. So where there's a person that you really want to keep, this is the program that would be most applicable to apply under. Basically, the person has to be employed in Manitoba for a Manitoba company on a full-time basis under a valid work permit. So their work permit must still be active and current. They have to be working for that employer for at least 6 months before making the application. The employer has to be willing to provide a long-term, full-time job position. The applicant has to be able to meet the job requirements, obviously. And the last point is that they need to intend to reside in Manitoba. So obviously it's a Manitoba program trying to keep temporary foreign workers and permanent residents from remaining in Manitoba. The second that I'll speak about is the business stream. And it's available to those people who are looking to invest in a business in Manitoba or purchase or open up a new business in Manitoba. Basically, the person has to have a minimum of at least 3 years ownership experience or experience as a senior management role for a successful business. They have to own at least 33.33% of the shares of a Canadian company. They have to commit at least $150,000 in Canadian funds towards that business, whether it's opening up a business or investing. And one key thing to note is that that investment should not be made until after they've made their application and their application has been processed. If they've made the investment in advance of that, they're going to have to remake that investment because they need to see that the investment is going specific for this program. The person also has to have a net worth of at least $350,000 in Canadian funds. They'll have to come to Canada, specifically Manitoba, to conduct an exploratory visit. So they're going to attend meetings with business people, whether if it's to acquire a business or setting up a business. They're going to set up a meeting with the immigration department here in Manitoba to explain to them their business intent, and they're going to meet with lawyers and accountants. Basically, this person's going to continue with the business and manage the business. That's their purpose. And if nominated, they're going to deposit $75,000 in Canadian funds, which will be reimbursed to them once their business is successfully open. And again, the person has to intend to reside in Manitoba.
Thanks, Jennifer. We had two more. My guys at the back are waving me off. We had two more questions that we won't do right now. We may have an opportunity at the end, and these people will be available to mingle with those of you who have time and to answer questions. The other two questions that we did have, if we'd had a little bit longer, or if the bus had arrived a little bit earlier, Adrian was going to answer that if you establish a business in Manitoba, do the labor and employment laws of Canada apply or of Manitoba? Which of those two regimes applies if you establish a business in this jurisdiction? So Adrian is available to talk with you about that. And then Jeff was going to deal with one further issue. Like every country, Canada has government regulations that cover a range of areas, and tax is no exception. In Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, or CRA, is the body responsible for taxation compliance. If a business runs into CRA issues or challenges related to shred or transfer pricing, what is the process in Canada to appeal a decision of the CRA with which you're not happy? So Jeff is, again, going to be available, and we'll be able to discuss that with you should you feel the need. We do have Mark available. Have you got the microphone, Mark? If there are questions and answers now for 5 minutes or so, Mark Howe, our Director of Client Relations, would be pleased to circulate the room, and the Richard's wandering away, starving, poor skinny, gaunt fellow that he is. We have 5 or 10 minutes that we can answer questions, though, on the matters that have been covered to date. And if you just put your hand up, Mark Howe will come around and provide you with a microphone. Going once, going twice, one over there. Aha, good. Oh, not a plant.
Thank you. I do business in Canada all the time. My people come across the border to sell and to do supervision of installation of the equipment that we sell. How does that impact, or how is the work permit issue impact that? Do they need work permits, and have we somehow managed not to have to get them?
Actually, that is one of the exemptions. That one, to me, based on what you've explained, may fall within the business visitor category in what's called the after-sales service program. And basically, those people, your company would have entered into a sales agreement for a piece of equipment. The equipment would not be a Canadian piece of equipment. It would obviously be a U.S. or type of equipment. Your people then would be coming across the border to install the equipment or repair the equipment based specifically on what's in the sales agreement. So that's one of the key things for the after-sales service, is making sure your sales agreement deals with repairs, warranty work, and installation, or that it references another agreement that's going to deal with that, because that's what they're going to have to show in order to be able to come across as a business visitor.
Anybody else? Any other questions that,
Bring in the microphone here.
okay.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mariela. I represent the Argentina delegation. And my question is regarding those businesses that actually would like to be registered in Canada with a customer base branch, but not necessarily be the main branch or headquarter. In other words, what about those businesses that would like to set up a second headquarter or a subsidiary branch like an LLC in the United States? Could you explain to me that possibility?
There is that possibility of.
Jan, just say, are you thinking from an employee perspective of doing that, or from sort of a corporate law and governance perspective? Which area are you interested in your question?
A service company that could put a customer base branch in Canada,
Yeah, I don't think
and
that
especially
that's-
in Manitoba.
Yeah, I don't think that's particularly an employment-related question. Richard, did you hear the question?
I think I can. Typically, there's a variety of business structures, and there are some components attached to them, not the least of which is tax. But on the simplest basis, if you had an entity in your home jurisdiction, it could establish a what they call a branch. That entity would be carrying on business legally as its own entity in Canada. It would have to be registered as an extra federally or extra provincially incorporated entity, and it could then conduct itself in Canada. It's a very simple process. Typically, what you have to assure yourself is you're not going to be competing with another name. But having said that, what you will then find is that entity as a branch, that entire entity in its home jurisdiction will be subject to Canadian law. And there are some particular disadvantages of that, including not the least of which you may find that entity in Argentina, did you say it was Argentina? That entity would potentially be taxed in Canada based on its income around the world. And hence, there's some opportunities that what you might choose to do is have your Argentinian parent create a Canadian subsidiary as a standalone entity, which would operate independently. And I said there are some tax ramifications associated with that because, as I'd mentioned earlier, we don't typically have consolidated tax returns, so that standalone Canadian subsidiary would be subject to Canadian tax. It was operating at a loss in its startup period of time. You wouldn't be able to use those losses typically to offset your income in Argentina. But for the purpose of creating a corporation, it's a typically easy process. The only proviso is if you have a federally incorporated entity, you need to have a minimum number of Canadian directors, usually 25%. There are some, and let me back up a moment. There are two forms of incorporations in Canada. One is under the federal jurisdiction, and one is under one of the 10 provincial jurisdictions. If you're using a provincial jurisdiction, there are provinces that do not require Canadian director requirements, and hence you might choose to have yourself incorporated, your subsidiary, in a jurisdiction where if you didn't want to have Canadian directors, you'd be able to choose that opportunity.
Thank you, Richard. I think we'd probably best move along now. We want to make sure that everybody is comfortably able to be out of here in time to engage in your afternoon presentation. I'd like to introduce to you my partner, Jan Letterman. Jan is a senior corporate commercial lawyer with TDS Law. She's a very, very active member of our community in a great variety of ways, and would like to introduce one of her very special clients.
So thank you to everyone who presented. Thanks to the guests for coming and the terrific questions. It's my pleasure today to have the honor of introducing to you our guest speaker, a client and a friend, Miss Diane Gray. Diane is a thoughtful and, for reasons that will become clear in a moment, an exceptionally knowledgeable leader in Manitoba's business community. She's a passionate supporter of all things Manitoba, an engaged volunteer, and a terrific speaker. Diane Gray is the founding president and CEO of Centreport Canada. Centreport is Canada's first trimodal inland port, foreign trade zone, and encompasses 20,000 acres in the northwest quadrant of Winnipeg, north of the airport. From 1995 to 2009, Diane worked for the province of Manitoba, where she served simultaneously as Deputy Minister of Finance, Deputy Minister of Federal, Provincial, and International Relations, and Deputy Minister of Trade. In December of 2010, she was awarded the Lieutenant Governor's Medal for Excellence in Public Service Administration for Manitoba. Diane currently serves on the boards of Manitoba Film and Music, Manitoba's International Trades Council, MyTax, the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, Biomedical Commercialization Canada, and I've heard recently of a couple others, but I'm not sure that they're public yet. Diane is a graduate of the University of Manitoba's and the University of Winnipeg's Joint Masters of Public Administration program, and she has an undergraduate degree in political studies. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of Centreport, Ms. Diane Gray.
Good afternoon, everyone, and officially, once again, welcome to Winnipeg for those of you that aren't residents of our province or our great city. It's a pleasure to be here at the second Centrallia event. I had the honor also of speaking at the TDS lunch 2 years ago, and we know that Centrallia is a terrific opportunity for bringing together business from around the globe to meet right here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, to hopefully establish new sales opportunities, new joint ventures, and new partnerships. I'm pleased to do a general overview presentation on some of the highlights of doing business in Canada. I won't be talking about tax law or immigration law, but this is more of a sales pitch on why this is a great country and a great place to do business. I'll tell you a little bit about Winnipeg, and then I'm also going to give you a general overview on what it is we're building right here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in terms of our exciting new economic development project called Centreport. So just a little bit about doing business in a global environment. The global recession that we emerged from taught us a few things. And there's some takeaways that are really important in terms of what Centrallia is about. Of course, we know that business now more than ever before is interconnected. Countries are connected, and we saw how the recession that started in the United States had impacts around the world, including Asia. We know what's happening in the European parts of the European right now have impacts also globally. So business is interconnected, and it is also causing us to rethink how we manage supply chains, sales relationships, and of course, growth for business. We also know that protectionism is alive and well. And we see it firsthand in some protectionist policies introduced by governments. And that's why this direct relationship among business can help keep governments aware of the importance of not looking inward, but thinking about how their province, their city, their country looks at the rest of the world and what the benefits of thinking globally are. And then finally, one of the key takeaways that we heard over and over again is that stability and predictability are absolutely crucial for business. And that's predictability and stability in our financial institutions, in our tax policy, in general government policy around support for business. But it's also about understanding how business needs to differentiate itself to stand out and really what is a global environment. And so it's in that context that we're developing what we are here in Centerport. Now, Canada has done some interesting things to support investment. And if you look at how we emerged from the recession, the supports that the Government of Canada put in place, they've actually held us up really quite well. Forbes Canada has now named Canada as the best place in the world to do business. The best place. We have a corporate income tax rate that is 33% lower than that of the United States. And that's combined federal, provincial, corporate income taxes. That is a 1/3% advantage for companies headquartered here, doing business here in Canada. We also are doing some things that are really unique that help to support our manufacturing industry, for example. Whereas other countries are thinking about protectionism and tariffs to restrict global inputs and trade, Canada is eliminating tariffs on manufacturing inputs, which means that by 2015, companies that source their inputs from around the world, regardless of whether those countries they're sourcing from are free trade country or we have free trade agreements with, they will be able to manufacture a tariff-free product. And that tariff-free product, of course, will be then at a lower price and able to compete globally for new markets. We also are a very open country when it comes to trade. 60% of our GDP in this country is tied to trade. 1 in 5 jobs tied to trade. So we get it. In order to be able to grow our economy and grow our country, we have to do business. We have a population in our entire country the size of the state of California. So if we don't think outward, we won't thrive and survive. It's a little bit about what's going on here, right here in Winnipeg. KPMG does a competitive alternative study about every 2 years, and the last one just came out. And what it does, it looks at the cost, all costs of doing business in cities. They've also looked at countries, and they've ranked countries. And of the countries they've ranked, Canada is number 2 of all developed countries after the UK. We're number 1 within North America. And Winnipeg is the most cost-effective place to do business of 22 Midwest cities that were studied. And that's in the United States and in Canada. In fact, generally speaking, Canada has about a 5% cost advantage over the United States. We also have incredibly affordable hydroelectric power, green renewable energy, the lowest published electrical rates in North America. And that obviously is an advantage to businesses setting up shop right here in Manitoba. The other thing we're doing, and we heard a little bit about it earlier from Jan, is we're growing our population through immigration. In order to be able to have a supply of skilled laborers, our provincial government has been reaching out to the business community in order to identify the types of skills and qualifications necessary, and have been very aggressive at growing our population. Last year, 17,000 new skilled immigrants came to Winnipeg alone. Next slide, please. Generally speaking, we have strong economic growth here in Canada. Our economic growth leads the G7 countries, and indicators coming out from all of the major banks in Canada show that not only is Canada doing well, relatively speaking, but so is Western Canada. Right now, about 80% of the GDP growth in Canada is coming from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and that's projected to hold over the next number of years as they look forward as well. So it's a little bit of a tale of 2 economies within our country, but certainly Western Canada is on a bit of a roll. What that also means is that there's competition within the region to attract jobs and skilled labor. And in this area, Manitoba presents a significant cost advantage over locating in provinces to our west. Next slide, please. Manitoba also offers a number of strategic incentives. Not just the lower corporate income tax rate combined, but there's things that we're doing here. You heard about the R&D tax credits. Manitoba actually tops up the federal tax credits, and so there's a combined 55% R&D tax credit for those doing business with our post-secondary institutions on the ground here in the province, most of which is refundable. So that's pretty significant. There's also a number of other tax credits in place. There's manufacturing tax credits, which help to support our manufacturing industry, of which a significant proportion is also refundable. There's new digital media tax credits, as well as some other strategic ones. Where the province has also been a huge investor is in education. And that has held up across not just secondary and post-secondary, but also across our apprenticeship, our co-ops, trades, and in fact, we have the most comprehensive supports of their kind in Canada. The province is able to use this as a strategic incentive in order to be able to work with business to help them grow their business right here in the province with skilled labor. Next slide, please. Now, we have a number of business sectors that are key within the province. I'm not going to name all of them, but some of the key ones are manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. If you're here as part of Centrallia, you perhaps went on one or more of the tours that would have allowed you to see some of our leading manufacturing companies. 14% of our GDP in the province comes from manufacturing. The largest North America bus industry in North America across New Flyer and motor coach industries. We have Western Canada's largest aerospace industries with Boeing, Standard Aero, Bristol Magellan, Cormer Aerospace. We also have significant agricultural manufacturers, MacDon, for example, which was featured in the Winnipeg Free Press today as one of Manitoba's success stories, which exports agricultural equipment around the globe. We also are a major financial services sector here in the province, particularly in the mutual fund industry. We have Great West Life, and with Investors Group owned by Power Corp out of Montreal, which are together combined provide one of the largest insurance companies and the largest mutual fund companies in Canada. We also are a major energy producer. I talked about hydropower. They're on with significant aggressive growth plans to diversify and grow the hydroelectric power that they produce for domestic consumption here, but also significantly for export into the United States. And the export activity helps to offset our domestic prices, which keeps our hydroelectric rates here very low. We also have a significant agricultural sector, 4% of our GDP, and within that, food processing, packaging, and others. We also, and sliding into this, have a major transportation sector. 7% of our GDP is engaged in either direct transportation, warehousing, or related activity, and you're going to see that a little bit more as I talk about Centerport in a minute. So what we do at Centerport is we act as a facilitator. Essentially, we help to connect the dots between business wanting to do business and whatever their needs may be to make that decision to locate here in Manitoba. And in some cases, that's connecting two companies together. In other cases, it represents a land development deal. In others yet, it's introductions to transportation authorities for how they can manage their supply chains in more cost-effective ways. Centerport itself, as you heard, is a 20,000 acre or 8,000 hectare inland port. It is a very significant development. I took a group on a tour this morning. We saw only about 25% or 1/4, and that takes 1 hour to drive around, just to give you a sense of the size and scope. It is about 1/5 the size of the entire metro region of the city of Winnipeg. We are 1 hour north of the Emerson border crossing, the busiest border crossing in Western Canada, and we have on-site trimodal logistics. And what that means is we bring together 3 Class 1 railroads, with significant trucking assets and a very busy air cargo airport, and I'll tell you just a little bit more about that in a minute. Next slide, please. So our location matters, and you've probably heard and got the hint that we are in the center of things with Centrallia and Centerport. But being in the center of Canada is more than just a spot on the map. It's more than just a location that you see where we are on an intersect point in North America. This is exactly where all of the major trade and transportation gateways and corridors come together. So we are at the eastern end of the Asia-Pacific Gateway, connected by rail lines to Vancouver and Prince Rupert. We are at the western end of the Quebec-Ontario Gateway and the Atlantic Gateway, connected by rail to the ports of Thunder Bay, Montreal, and Halifax. We are at the northern end of the Mid-Continent Trade and Transportation Corridor, connected by rail to the ports of Houston, New Orleans, Los Cardenas, Manzanillo, and Mexico. And we are at the southern end of the Arctic Gateway, connected by rail to the port of Churchill. So you can see why our location starts to matter when you think about all of those connections to various ports that service the European Union, India, South America, and of course the Asia-Pacific region. Next slide, please. Now, Centerport is focused on very specific business activity. And one of the key things we learned early on is that we couldn't be all things to all people. And so we have done an assessment of where we think our strengths lie and for what companies. So we're very focused on attracting manufacturing and assembly industries, warehousing and distribution, both on a regional basis within our area, as a break bulk for Western Canada, as a staging area for the North. We're also looking at agricultural commodity activity, whether it's value added in terms of pea fractionization or stuffing of soybeans into containers for export to inland China, and as well transportation and related logistics service industries. And all of those have been finding a foothold in this new inland port as we continue to develop it. We have currently sold about 150 acres of land in the last two plus years, which represents a three times the natural industrial absorption rate for the city of Winnipeg. Business is getting it. We have attracted about 30 new businesses to our footprint already, and that is pre-servicing, pre-infrastructure being fully developed. So business are coming in, buying the land, and preparing for what they know is going to be a significant economic play in the years to come. Next slide, please. Now, just a little bit about some of our key projects. I talked about the trimodal nature of Centerport. Rail is fundamental and critical to an inland port. And we're blessed here in Winnipeg in having 3 Class 1 rail carriers serve our city: CN, CP, and Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Why does that matter? It matters because single rail line served projects can save as much as 50%, 50, in transportation costs over those that require interswitching between rail lines. So again, if you are a company that is shipping to Houston or Mexico or South America, you can ship out of Winnipeg using Burlington Northern Santa Fe South and save as much as 50%. If you're shipping to Memphis or New Orleans, you can use CN Direct and save as much as 50%. Those things matter when you are a rail-intensive served company, and we're going to continue to develop the business cases around that. We've launched a scoping study with AECOM's Rail Consulting Group that are looking at a traffic flow analysis and business case for developing what we call a common use rail facility. That rail facility will provide a large industrial platform for rail-intensive business to co-locate and be served by 3 Class 1 carriers out of a single site. that doesn't exist at any other inland port in North America. So we think this has the potential to be a real significant advantage for us. Next slide, please. We also are a major air cargo hub. When you arrived in Winnipeg, you would have arrived at the new passenger terminal here in our city. That has now been open for about 12 months, and it's something that the entire community is very proud about. That terminal has won a number of awards, including recognition for its energy efficiency under the LEED program. But what you probably don't realize is that Winnipeg is also a significant air cargo hub. We have the most dedicated cargo freighter flights of any other airport in the country of Canada. And that, again, is because of our strategic location in the center. We are the natural domestic redistribution point for Purolator, Cargojet, with significant operations by FedEx and UPS as well. And we expect that's going to continue to grow in the future because companies in many ways manage their supply chains using 3 modes of transportation. You may use air cargo to import parts or export parts. You may use air cargo to ship heavy equipment, like Fort Garry Fire Trucks that's building a new manufacturing facility at Centerport. You also are likely to manage some part of your supply chain using rail, and without exception, you're going to use trucks at some point. And it's a pleasure to see my colleague from the Manitoba Trucking Association here today. Next slide, please. We also are a major trucking center here in Winnipeg. 2 of Canada's 10 largest trucking companies are located in Winnipeg. They're headquartered at Centerport. A significant number of trucks for hire every single day in our province. That is a competitive advantage for those exporting, but also for those who are bringing goods into the province because you can lower your overall transportation costs. Under construction now at Centerport is a $212.5 million expressway. That highway is 80% complete, and it's expected to be complete in a year from now. That project is significant because it has allowed us to get ahead of where the future infrastructure demands may come from congestion. And it's not going to put pressure on the residential communities that surround the Inland Port project. Next slide, please. Our location also matters when you think about how far, how fast you can get out of Winnipeg when you cross dock in our city. We are a significant transload center here in the province, and within a guaranteed 24-hour period of time, you can get to major centers like Chicago, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and others. Within guaranteed 48 hours, you can get to almost all of continental United States. Next slide, please. I mentioned lower costs, and it's just to say we have had independent work done to confirm that we are the lowest cost place in central and western Canada to locate a distribution center. And that is taking into account the factors that KPMG looks at: land, taxes, labor, electricity costs, and others. Next slide, please. A couple of other interesting things we're doing at Centerport. One is we're creating a special planning area. Centerport crosses both the city of Winnipeg and a rural municipality. A special planning area will essentially allow us to create a master development plan for the project where all of the zoning, all of the development requirements, all of the permitting requirements will be transparent, will be done up front in order to allow for companies that are coming in to be fast-tracked through the development process. This will help companies get their projects in the ground within weeks as opposed to months or sometimes years. And that essentially means doing all the consultation, all the work by governments in advance, as opposed to as each project comes in. The second thing is that we're a tax increment financing area. In October 2008, the province of Manitoba passed legislation which created tax increment financing. It applies to Centerport and the downtown sports hospitality entertainment district. What a TIF does for Centerport is it allows governments to capture the incremental taxes paid for property and education, put it in a separate fund to be used for future infrastructure requirements and support at Centerport. So it creates an infrastructure flow of funding that is specific to the development we're doing at Centerport. Next slide, please. We also are Canada's only foreign trade zone. We have a single window to the federal foreign trade zone programs. It supports specific programs like the Customs Bonded Warehouse program that would be quite familiar to many in this room. That allows people to import goods from countries where we don't have free trade agreements, store them duty, tariff, and tax-free for up to 5 years before they're re-exported or there is a domestic point of sale. There's a number of other programs within the suite of the foreign trade zone programs across a number of departments. This helps to streamline the analysis of your business and to determine which would be the most effective in your particular case. Next slide. And just finally, one of the things we're looking at is bigger than just infrastructure and related development. It is about how we can use technology to address security concerns and create a leading edge inland port. And so we have been looking at what does the Beyond the Border Framework Agreement mean in terms of pushing back pre-inspections and other things from the border, securing shipments using technology. It also means that we have been looking at ways to address security concerns in other countries, like in China, for example, which has real concerns about the quality and safety of its food supply. So we've launched pilot projects testing radio frequency identification technology on food exports, agricultural exports from Manitoba. Why is that important? Because it allows the consumer in China to be able to verify that the product they're buying is indeed from Manitoba, Canada, which gives them identity preservation and security of supply. So we're working on the overall balance of trade. We're introducing some new ideas that help to support the supply chain. We're obviously doing a major industrial development here in the province. It'd be a pleasure. I'm going to be around Centrallia for the next 3 days, so I look forward to chatting with you, and I hope you have a very successful conference. Thank you.
We're getting very tight on time. Diane's available to answer questions, would be pleased to answer questions, but we understand if there's any of you feels the need to withdraw from the meeting at this time in order to make other commitments, feel free to do so. Okay. I'll just thank Diane very much for her presentation. It's been very exciting for us at TDS to be part of the Centerport development. It's a great activity in Canada and in the province of Manitoba. You can see that we have the most wonderful and skilled leader for that project that we could possibly ever hope for, and we hope that each and every one of you are interested in doing business in the province of Manitoba. While most of you have lawyers in your home jurisdiction, we'd just like to let you know on behalf of TDS that we're part of an international association of law firms. We have representatives in 160 different jurisdictions, and there's free consultation available in order to ascertain your needs either in Manitoba, anywhere else in Canada, or through most of the rest of the world. So look it up on the website. If you need access in those jurisdictions, we'd be most pleased to see that it's arranged for you. And again, thank you very, very much. Enjoy the conference, enjoy the rest of your time in Winnipeg, and have a wonderful few days. Thanks a lot.